I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. I have wanted to have this conversation for 22 years. Let me explain. In 2003, a tragedy struck that captured worldwide attention and revealed lessons that every business and every leader needs to understand and apply. So let me give you some more context here. So what happens when silence costs lives? When some of the brightest engineers at NASA had gut instincts that something was wrong, but didn't feel safe enough to speak up. The result was the Columbia tragedy. My guest today is Dr. Laura Gallaher, who was brought in after that disaster to help transform NASA's culture, teaching leaders how to create psychological safety in one of the most high-stakes environments on the planet. And we talked about what really happened behind the scenes at NASA, why fear and self-deception can cripple even the smartest teams, and how trust becomes the ultimate safeguard. Laura also shared her own story of discovering blind spots through 360 feedback and why she now champions what she calls radical self-acceptance as the key to authentic leadership. So if you ever wondered how to lead with courage, create a culture where people tell the truth, and bring out the best in their teams, you won't want to miss this conversation. This is the Leadovation Podcast. I'm Dean Newland. Let's dive in. Laura, it is kind of a treat to have you on this show, and I'll tell you why. It seems that every generation has certain international events that sort of become touchstone memories for them. And for me, I remember I was the marketing and development director for the small little theater in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And there was this big event coming up called a Challenger is going to lift off into space. And we're going to bring a person named Kristen McCullough out of New Hampshire, teacher. And everyone was watching this great event. And of course, we all know what happened. And we were just sort of like stunned watching this whole thing blow up. And then a few years later, I'm driving over to San Diego, California, and this thing called Columbia all of a sudden starts to break apart and crash. And we have a second issue happening. So I became kind of fascinated by both of those accidents. And I think I read the president's report on both of those particular issues. And that actually became sort of the inspiration for me to do a podcast, not a podcast, but a TED Talk on intuition, because as my understanding is, these poor engineers had hunches with no data to support it. Ergo, those who were in control, Morton Thiokol and so forth, said, no, there's no data to support this. We're going to get this thing up and running here any minute now. And of course, they didn't pay attention to those hunches, and we all know what happened. So the last of the piece of the story, why this is such an important conversation for me, is because then we ended up starting our company back in 1992. Yes, I'm dating myself. And we were trying to get into these big companies. We could never get past, the gatekeepers of these people. But then we fell into a relationship with the Challenger Learning Center out of Seattle, Washington, which is a mock-up of the Challenger spacecraft, mission control, and the whole. It was very high-tech, very cool, developed for kids to get them to overcome the fear that probably was created by watching a teacher go up and not come down. So they said, hey, we got all these people coming in wanting to use this for corporate events. Could you help us develop something? So we did. We all of a sudden launched this thing. Sorry for the pun. We ran about 4 or 5 of them up and down the West Coast. And all of a sudden we got AT&T, Microsoft, Hewlett Packard calling us. And that's what got us on the flipping map, was getting past that. So anyway, this is an important conversation to me. I want to hear your story about why were you brought into the Challenger issue, and what did you learn about that whole tragedy?
Yeah.
By the way,
course.
thanks for being here.
Actually, I was brought in Yes, thank you for having me, Dean. I was brought in for Columbia. Challenger.
I'm sorry. Columbia versus Challenger.
That's
Yes.
okay.
Two
No, it's
different
okay.
issues. Yeah, Columbia. Sorry.
Yes, I think I was 3 when Challenger happened, so NASA wasn't quite ready to bring me in. I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
hadn't
Well, you were a
formed
precocious kid, right?
my knowledge base, yeah, at that point in time. I appreciate that you can laugh too, because I know that it's heavy to talk, these accidents, getting right into it. It's probably part of why I did my dissertation on humor after I'd started my career with NASA. I was like, man, let me lighten this up with something completely different. But yeah, so Columbia, you're spot on, Dean, with the about intuition. And so just really quickly for your listeners who don't remember or don't know some of the specifics, during Columbia's final launch, there was this piece of foam that fell off the external tank, which is that big orange structure in the shuttle system, and it hit the wing of the orbiter. And the problem is that foam had been hitting the orbiter for years. It had happened many times before, and there had never been catastrophic consequences. And of course, this time was different, but they had already said that foam strikes, as they were called, were not an in flight issue. And so the engineers who were concerned about it, who had a gut feel that like something felt different or, gosh, I wish we had more data, they were fighting an uphill battle from the beginning. Because with the program review board saying it's not an in flight issue, there's no requirement for data. And it's not a small ask. So, what they wanted to do was reposition satellites to get images of the orbiter while it's orbiting the Earth, which means calling the Department of Defense. NASA doesn't own any spy satellites. And so, this is an interagency thing. It also would have meant stopping the missions that were happening on Columbia. So, stopping the science, which is not great. Everything is timed very meticulously for those missions. So it would have been massively, massively disruptive. And not to mention, a few years earlier, they attempted to get imagery when the door to the landing parachute came off, and the pictures didn't really help them much. So there's all these things that the engineers were up against when they wanted to request more imagery. And so unfortunately, the request was shut down, and there was all kinds of opportunity for, mission managers and engineers to speak up further. But there was a genuine fear of it having a negative impact on their career because, as you said, engineers following their gut,
Yeah, it
not
doesn't
so much a
fit.
thing at NASA. Like it
Yeah.
literally, there were walls painted with, "In God we trust, all others must bring data."
Yeah.
So nobody wants to be the engineer that stands up and says, "I know that I have no data to prove that this might be a problem. And I know that we don't like to think that failure is an option. Because, by the way, we have no idea what we could actually do to solve this problem if we do realize that there's a lot of damage to the wing. But I just have a gut feeling that something's
Right.
different this time." Like,
Right.
nobody wants to do that. There was even an exchange that happened between two of the engineers where one of them was really agitated about the whole situation and the other one called him Chicken Little. Like there were
Really?
all these defense
Wow.
mechanisms that were activated for them, and the communication and the collaboration was just completely breaking down. And in their defense, in NASA's defense, there are anomalies for every mission, almost
Sure.
countless anomalies. They have to constantly filter out. Like it's such a complicated system, the space shuttle. Things went wrong all the time. And they were always having to decide, do we pay
Sure.
attention to this? Do we pay attention to that? So it's not like they all said, well, maybe it's a huge catastrophic issue, but what are you going to do? Like it's not that kind of thing.
Well, you go back to the Apollo missions and some of those situations, we can go back and mention all sorts of problems that happened because we just
Oh,
didn't
yeah.
know. We had no experience, whether you had intuition or gut feeling or not. The mistakes will happen.
Yes, absolutely. And so, what I focused on, my business partner now, Dr. Philip Mead, was asked to lead the culture change initiative at Kennedy Space Center after the investigation board report said that NASA's culture was to blame. And it was really tricky because NASA had just been rated the number one place to work in the government. Like it was actually a great place to work. People loved working for NASA. You had really engaged people. You have some of the smartest people on the planet. You have literal rocket scientists. But there were cultural factors impacting people's beliefs and behavior that led very smart people to make very bad decisions.
So
So my business
given
partner,
no,
yeah, go
just
ahead.
so given the fact, if you could, I want to just go back to something you just said, if you wouldn't mind. You said that there are so many anomalies. There's so many variables.
Yeah.
It's so complex. And to your point, you're almost saying we understand now, so why this is why it is so. It's the industry. But how do you? Maybe you're going to get to this, and maybe I'm jumping ahead. But how do you create a culture that allows for people to speak up, have the psychological safety in which to do so, be accepted with their idea, knowing that there are going to be literally dozens or hundreds of anomalies that if we pay attention to each one of them, nothing happens.
Right. I mean, it is incredibly difficult. And, I think I have a better answer to your question, except for like that piece that you just added at the end.
Sorry.
But I will say this too, though. No, because since the program review board had said that foam strikes are not an in-flight issue, so that decision was made prior to Columbia's final mission. And there were people that didn't agree with that. I mean, part of that decision was actually based on a foam strike that didn't even hit the orbiter. It hit the solid rocket booster, which the solid rocket booster falls off before it actually gets out into low Earth orbit. So it doesn't have to activate a heat shield. It just falls back into the water. And so even Linda Ham, who was the mission manager for S-107, said that she thought that the rationale for the decision was lousy, but she didn't push against it. She didn't speak up against it. And so it's one of those things that, yes, it is complicated and there are so many anomalies they could always be paying attention to, but there are also so many opportunities where people could be more open about their dissension and their, I disagree with this, that if the leaders were willing to hold space and listen without ego, they could all collectively make much better decisions together.
So I know you were only 3 at the time, going back to Challenger, and then of course we had Columbia later, but one would think, and tell me what the thought pattern was for NASA at the time. We had this major issue with Columbia, got a lot of news, scared the crap out of a lot of people, a lot of kids, and yet we repeat what was essentially the same problem. Was there something after Challenger that caught the attention of NASA and all of their partners to say, we probably have a culture that helped support this tragedy? Was there any thought at that point, or did they not necessarily take it seriously and it only became a big deal after Columbia?
I do think that there was an awareness that there were cultural problems and implications around the Challenger accident. I mean, obviously the technical piece of what happened with Challenger was a different technical issue than what happened with Columbia, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Because it was the O-rings on the solid rocket boosters. I think that the focus after Challenger was much more on let's get these O-rings right on the solid rocket boosters. I think it was more about fixing things from a technical perspective. And I don't think that they weighed culture quite as heavily, or perhaps they did, but they didn't have it as an ongoing thing. And that's actually one of the things that was different about Columbia is there was not only the big culture change initiative, which Congress wouldn't let NASA fly the shuttle unless they demonstrated that they made changes to the cultural issues that were deemed to play a role in the tragedy.
So this was the result of Congress.
For a long time.
Congress forced this.
Congress did force this. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
And after we had return to flight, which I believe actually happened on the 4th of July, if I'm not mistaken.
Good timing.
2006, maybe. Yeah. I got to check my years, but yeah, so patriotic and cool, right?
Totally. Yeah. Good.
There was the Space Center at Kennedy said, we need this to be an ongoing function. Like the ability to create psychological safety and making sure that we don't have people at NASA who don't raise an opinion because they're afraid it might have a negative impact on their career. We need to be paying attention to this in perpetuity. And so that organization development function was formed at Kennedy Space Center. It still exists today. I'm not there anymore. I left, 11 years ago, but the function still exists. So there's, I think, a much greater focus on it now. And of course, also societally, I see greater focus on culture and other organizations too.
It's really, okay. So now let's get into the lessons learned here, if I could, Laura, because as people are listening to this, they're saying, yeah, this is an interesting story about our history, but I'm sure there are many, many examples people could put in their head where they thought, this is what's going on in my company. We have people who are not speaking up, who should be speaking up. We have a culture that doesn't necessarily allow for non-subject matter experts to provide their input in an area that maybe they're not, the perfect person for. We have evidence-based fill in the blank, evidence-based healthcare, evidence-based decision-making. We seem to be almost, in some ways, with the advent of technology continuing to speed up, becoming more enamored with evidence in order to make decisions and less focused on the human aspect of those decisions themselves. And then I'm thinking about Amy Edmondson's work. I know you probably know all about her stuff on psychological safety over at
Absolutely.
Harvard. And again, saw her speak last year. Great stuff.
Nice.
But how do
Yeah.
you, what do we do here, my friend? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, what is, maybe it's not a secret sauce, it's one size fits all, but what's the process to be able to change a culture that is so enamored with evidence-based decision making, maybe even hierarchical groupthink? This is the way we've done it,
Mm-hmm.
to what you're prescribing, what Edmondson is prescribing. What do we do to be able to create those cultures?
Yeah, I love that you're pulling on psychological safety because as a psychologist, that's what I was most interested in from the CABE report, the Columbia Accident Investigation Board report, is that these even really smart rocket scientists have self-deception that leads to these bad decisions. And so psychological safety, I think your listeners are probably familiar, although I'm really sad, Dean, to hear that a lot of people haven't heard that term anymore. We need to like
Really?
bring it back with a resurgence. Yeah, I mean, she coined it in 99, and then
Yeah.
Google did their Project Aristotle, and New York Times did a piece on that in 2016.
Yeah.
But that's like 9 years ago already. Like we need to
Right.
bring it back to the forefront
Right.
because often now leaders, I only get like a couple hands now of who has heard of it, but it's huge. And I love
Yeah.
Amy Edmondson's work as well.
Yeah.
So I'll actually tell you, I want to bring myself into this story, and this is a little embarrassing, but I have worked on my self-acceptance to be able to share it now publicly.
Congratulations.
So I feel like I was working with NASA primarily to help the leaders create psychological safety for their teams. Like that was one of my primary functions as I saw it. And after I had been working for NASA for a few years, I was promoted into a leadership role. I actually moved up really quickly when I was there. And I did one of many 360-degree feedback assessments. Have you done one of those fun things before, Dean?
That's part of our service line as a company is we do.
Awesome.
In fact, we got somebody on my team right now. I can hear it in the other room doing a 360 for one of our clients. So it's a big part of our world. Yes.
Okay. So I had just done one of those and I was participating in a leadership training. And I remember sitting in the cafeteria during a lunch break and I had this 30-something page report and I was getting pretty good feedback so far. And I turned to this page where the respondents were asked, to what degree does Laura ever use these negative influence tactics? And I see that a couple people on my own team had indicated that they thought that I would sometimes bully them intellectually.
Ooh.
Like, yeah, total gut punch, just like knife in the eye.
What's that? That's not me.
I don't
How
even
can
know
that be?
I was horrified. I don't know what my face looked like, Dean, but my assigned coach, I met with her later that afternoon and she said, "Oh my God, I saw you in the cafeteria and your face was hilarious." Okay. Thank you for laughing at my pain. I don't know, but I was horrified. I mean, I was humiliated. I'm like, I'm a psychologist, right? I have my PhD in psychology. I have been brought in to teach leaders how to create psychological safety. And here I am struggling to create that for at least a couple people on my own team. What is happening?
Right.
Because I can promise you, Dean, never did I ever wake up and say, you know what I'm going to do today? Let me bully some people intellectually.
Well, of course,
never my goal, ever.
Yeah, totally not. I mean, that's what I think is such an important distinction here is that we judge ourselves based on our own intentions, and then we judge others based on their actions, assuming it's their intention. And so people misunderstand all the time what your actions actually were intended to do, but it doesn't mean that we still shouldn't be aware of that. I still think that we probably are about 30% aware of the effect that we have on other people. The rest of it's all blind spot. And we have no flipping idea.
And of course, like I am responsible for my own internal reactions that I have to other people. So some of the impact that I have on them, that is a product of, the relationship they have with themselves. And as a leader, I really wanted to be effective. And so that result, which really did surprise me and horrify me, kicked off a lot of introspection for me because it was a lack of self-awareness for sure. And what I was able to figure out is that there would be moments when I would be with my team and I was doing things that always used to work pretty well for me as an individual contributor. I was speaking up, I was taking initiative, I was advocating for my position, I was demonstrating a lot of confidence in, the way that I wanted to go. And of course, when I moved into a leadership role and I did all those same behaviors the exact same way, but now I have this leadership position, it's interpreted pretty differently. And so whereas I might have thought we're just engaging in debate, they might see it as like, well, I guess we're just going to do what Laura says then.
Yeah.
But it wasn't just that. It wasn't just that I hadn't yet made an effective enough leap into leading. It was that I actually had these subconscious fears about my own competence that would cause these defense mechanisms to leak out of me in conversation. So if I started to fear that I wasn't being effective or I wasn't influencing or persuading people, they weren't on board with whatever I was suggesting, instead of releasing any ego and listening to their questions and hearing counter perspectives and just holding space, instead of doing all of that, my fear of looking foolish or stupid, which was a subconscious fear, would cause me to be even more forceful with my suggestions, right? And I would start to, quote statistics or research or something that I thought would just make my case more effective. And I didn't know it at the time, but I could look in hindsight and see, okay, so that was actually a defense mechanism based on my own self-judgment, my own fear of my own incompetence.
So I'd love it if you, at some point it's tied back to the work you did with Columbia, and then I want to move on to some other stuff. But I also feel that the foundation of all this has to do something to do with, as corny as it sounds, trust. That if you are, I don't know, have your own imposter syndrome going on and we're in a relationship, we work together or we're friends or what have you, but it starts to show up, right? You start to behave in such a way to be able to mitigate whatever you're trying to hide or not totally accepting of. If we've got a relationship that's based on trust, I'm kind of going like, hey, there goes Laura again doing her thing. And I don't care, right? Because I love you, you're my friend or whatever, you're a colleague, I respect you. I can allow you to act out. I can allow you to let your freak flag fly. I can allow you to explore yourself in all colors, shapes, and forms, even if it means that once in a while you say something that might feel inappropriate, but I know you well enough to know what the intention is behind that. So in some ways, I think that this is almost like it's an opposition, or not an opposition, like it's a teeter-totter. Like, the more trust you have in a relationship, the less important it is for us to be tiptoeing around people because we know who they are as people. So that's just my 2 cents. What are your thoughts on that?
I totally agree. And I think that trust is essential. And there's so many facets to trust, as you know, because I think that there are a lot of cases where people would say, absolutely, I trust them, but I don't want to confront them about their imposter syndrome.
Right.
Or like, well, I don't want to hurt their feelings.
Right.
So, okay, so maybe I trust their competence, but perhaps I don't fully trust their character, or I have my own fears. My own defense mechanisms are to withhold my feedback from you because, oh my gosh, if I call this out and I bring this to your attention and your feelings are hurt or you're mad at me, I don't know that I can cope with that. Like there's all this stuff under the surface for people that prevents them from having the really open dialogue. But what you're describing, Dean, when we come in and we're working with leadership teams, this is actually what we start with. We start with figuring out what your own signs of defensiveness are. Like, what are all the different ways that it can show up for you? And then they actually talk about it. They share. They're like, these are my 3 go-tos. And then we even help them create these, we call them collaboration contracts, which is to say, if I see you doing that thing, and I know that it's not the most effective, you've given me permission to say something or do something that's going to be a signal to you of like, I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And then there's no tiptoeing.
Right.
But it's something, it's an agreement that we make. Can I show you what we do on my team? It's really silly. Okay. So our collaboration contract.
Does it involve a prop? I mean, you're reaching for something.
It does involve a prop.
All right. So describe what it is you have in your hand for those of you who are not seeing what Dr. Laura has in your right hand. What is that?
Yeah. So this is a shark hand puppet that I am holding, and it's plushy. So he's a very friendly looking shark, don't you think, Dean?
Definitely. You want to cuddle up to him. Yeah.
Which, so there's some comic relief, right? Like if we're in a Zoom meeting, I just kind of slowly like bring it up onto the screen. Yeah, we had an offsite a few years ago, and quite a few years back now, but we watched like the Meg And we all kind of developed this affinity for watching ridiculous shark movies together. So it's silly. It doesn't have to be that silly. It could also be something more like, hey, we're on the same team. Like it could be a verbal statement that somebody makes, but it's an agreement like you're describing where it's like, we have high enough trust
Yes.
that I don't have to let you spin off the rails. I can help you notice it. And I even used the language earlier of call out, but I prefer the language of call in. I'm not calling you out. I'm calling you in. I'm saying,
Back
hey,
into yourself.
we're
Yeah.
working together on this. It's okay. Like we're all here to support you. Nobody's attacking, nobody's judging. We're cool. But it takes practice and time and self-awareness and vulnerability and courage typically for teams to cultivate that kind of awareness and trust.
What was the result of your work and your colleagues' work at NASA as a result of all this? What did you find were some benefits that what changed?
So, I mean, there were some, big things that changed, like redesign of the organization. So, something I don't often talk about that much because it does impact, it's related to psychology, but the design of the organization was problematic. You had, safety and engineering embedded underneath the programs, which means that you've got a program manager who is supposed to simultaneously be responsible for schedule and budget and technical and engineering and safety and all of that. And it's impractical. And so, even the design of the organization that these companies have, it sends signals and messages about decision making and who actually has a seat at the table and who doesn't. So there's some really big things like that that were done to give engineering like their own seat at the table, meaning they don't have to answer to the program. They can answer directly to, the center director or whatever it might be. But the work that I was doing was really about like ongoing maintenance and improvement and enhancement of the culture that was worked to create from the Culture Change Initiative. It was about when we have new leaders coming in and they have a whole skill set that they need to cultivate around how do I manage my own defensiveness so that I can create psychological safety. That's key. Because most leaders are not trying to destroy psychological safety. Just like I wasn't trying to bully people intellectually, but they do have these subconscious defense mechanisms that really hurt psychological safety. And so it was ongoing work to really help those leaders elevate their self-acceptance and their self-awareness.
So it's not just we're going to change to make it easier for you. You're going to change in order to work and survive and thrive in this culture. Like it's bilateral. It's not just. I mean, the organization is the only one who's responsible for this. There's both sides of the fence.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, NASA became really good with leadership development. There were all kinds of leadership programs that were put in place for emerging leaders. So people who weren't even in leadership roles yet, still in individual contributor roles, so they could better understand some of the psychology of what happens for human beings. And by the time they get into leadership role, they've already got a solid foundation, because most companies will hire the best salesperson to go lead the sales team, and then everything goes downhill because they're not good at leading, they're good at sales. And then they're doing less selling and they're trying to lead, but it's not going well. So those are the kinds of things that we were doing inside NASA's culture.
So given that NASA is such a focused organization on engineering and metrics, and they have to be, and certainly that makes sense. You got Six Sigma going on. You got all these different processes to measure everything down to the fingernail of every process. And then you bring in something like leadership development, culture change. How did they measure success, given that that was the paradigm that they assert value over things? Were they allowing it to be like, we know it's the right things to do, but we have no really good way to measure this? Or did you help them develop a measurement process to be able to, in a sense, determine the benefit of all of this culture work?
There were so many metrics and measures over the several years that I was there. But the one that I think stands out the most is the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey, which is the same survey that was done just a few months before the accident. And it was crazy, Dean. So they did the survey before the accident happened. While they were looking at the results, the accident occurred. And then after the accident had happened, the results came out, and NASA's right there at the top of the list. Best place to work in the federal government. Yeah, just crazy timing on this. So the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey was modified after the accident to include an item that was very, very specific to NASA, which I'm not going to nail the wording of it, but essentially it was, I feel comfortable raising a dissenting opinion without fear of a negative impact on my career. Because that was the sentiment that was
Missing.
said by several of the engineers, the ones that
Yeah.
had the gut feeling that were nervous and were speaking up to a point, but then stopped. It was because they felt like it won't be good for my career to keep speaking up, which, by the way, they're not saying that and saying, well, we might lose the crew, but I don't want to hurt my career. That's not how this works. What
Right.
happens is the fear of impact on career flares up, all these survival instincts get activated, and then self-deception kicks in, and people convince themselves that it's probably going to be okay.
Right. Yes.
That's what happens.
We justify it.
So
Yeah.
it's so easy to look at something, Monday morning quarterback and go like, oh, I would never do that. Or, oh, of course I would speak up. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that anybody can make if they're listening to this. The question you want to ask yourself is, how might I also find myself in that kind of situation? Because if you're not willing to see how you could also make that same kind of mistake or error, you're that much more likely to do it.
Yeah.
Which is, again, why self-acceptance is so important. Be accepting of your fallibility, of your imperfections, and you'll actually be more self-aware.
So the radical, you mentioned prior to this conversation, this phrase that you kind of coined called radical self-acceptance. Define that some more. I mean, one could sort of get some meaning out of the words based on our past history of what we mean by radical, what we mean by self-acceptance and so forth. But what is the radical part? What is it that's above and beyond your normal run-of-the-mill self-acceptance? And why have you really become so focused on that?
Your run-of-the-mill self-acceptance. Yeah. So,
I'm going down to Kroger to buy some self-acceptance, next to the self-esteem and a little bit of hubris. I'm going to get a whole nother, I'm going to create a recipe for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. There's your basic, and then you've got the radical. So self-acceptance is, you're okay with who you are right now, including your flaws and imperfections and your talents and strengths. And actually, the language of radical, I don't want it to be, but it is. Actual self-acceptance is fairly radical, for a couple of reasons that we were chatting about. One is that I think that it's massively misunderstood. And the other, well, everything else probably springs from that. But people think things like, if I accept myself, then I'm not going to get any better. Why would I accept myself? I want to improve. And so there's a fundamental misunderstanding about the relationship between self-acceptance and self-improvement.
That's your paradox theory.
They think, yeah, that's paradox theory, which says these things coexist. Self-acceptance and self-improvement are two totally different dimensions. You can focus on self-improvement from a self-judging lens, or you can focus on self-improvement from a self-accepting lens. Change your lens, change your life.
There's another good book title.
You like that one?
Yeah, you better grab it quick before somebody takes it.
Change your lens, change your life. Yeah.
There you go. Brought to you
by radical self-acceptance, not just your run-of-the-mill self-acceptance. The other, misconception is that if I accept myself, does that mean I'm conceited, I'm arrogant, I'm boastful?
Right.
Which, no. Arrogance is actually a result of low self-acceptance. Somebody that walks in and they're cocky and they're arrogant and they think that they're better than other people, that is a defense mechanism in and of itself that comes about because they don't actually have high self-acceptance.
It's interesting you mentioned all this because you were talking about 360s. I just delivered a 360 to a senior leader yesterday. A female, not that that makes any difference, but she consistently gave herself lower scores than everybody else. I said, so why are you doing that? And she says, well, I think I can always improve, always can get better. And I go, yeah, so, but why are you undervaluing what you do? And she kind of quite didn't see the benefit of it. I says, what I think shows up for your people is that they want the full meal deal of you showing up with your convictions, your boldness, your flaws, all of it. They want you to show up powerfully. And that when you rate yourself lower, you are actually translating that self-perception into your behavior, which then robs us of what we want from you. And she goes, okay, now I get it. Now that makes sense.
Nice.
Now that makes sense.
Absolutely. That's
why
when I talk about self-acceptance.
I'm noble, Yeah.
Right. Yeah, to diminish yourself.
Yes.
Dean, do you know the poem Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson?
Yeah. Yeah.
So good.
Do you want to
highly recommend
bars?
It. Is it a song?
I know, I was being facetious. Do you want to give us a few lines out of it? I think it's something about our deepest fear is not that we something, but that we are bold, we are powerful, we are, we're all this stuff. We're afraid of being the full, highest and best self that we are meant to be. There's something
100%
scary about showing up the way we know we can be. And I don't know.
Yeah,
I think everybody has to answer that question as to why. What's that about for each person? But I think for me
I think it's a
personally,
lot
if
of
I were,
programming.
yeah, I think so too. But I also think I'm afraid of losing people in the process.
Mm.
Like if I become really
So,
powerful, I'm going to lose people.
yeah. Okay, so because you asked me to hum a few bars, I have it right
Did you
here
find
because I
it?
talk about it. So yeah, and I do this stress detox for high achievers workshop, and it's like an imagery experience that I create for participants in our last week. And so I'll read a little bit of this. So we ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We're all meant to shine, as children do.
It's great. I'm really
And it
glad
goes
you
on
brought
from
that up.
there. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it gives other people permission. When you have higher self-acceptance, it creates a path for others to do the same.
Yes.
Because when you have high self-acceptance, you can be vulnerable. You're willing to acknowledge the weaknesses and imperfections that you have, and you can feel the vulnerability that even exists in accepting praise and compliments.
Yeah.
That's vulnerable too for people,
Yeah.
right? Don't you know people that are like, oh, I'm so uncomfortable. Don't give me compliments. Like, that's
Yes.
hard because that's also vulnerable. But vulnerability is courageous and courage is contagious.
It's great.
So lead the way, be the one to go first with that self acceptance stuff. It works.
All right. So, Dr. Laura,
Yeah.
I'm looking at the clock here and I'm saying, okay, we got to have to wrap this up. I mean, there's a part of me that goes, no, screw that. I want to keep talking to this fascinating person. So here's the deal. I want you to invite me onto your show
I know. I
as
got
a
to get my show
guest.
going again.
I want you
Yes.
to I want you to blow some air back into it and I'll get on
Mm-hmm.
your show because I want to keep this conversation going. I find this fascinating. I find you fascinating. I love this topic. That being said, how can people learn more about you? Tell us about you and your speaking, your books, your highest and best expression, where you're headed, all of that in about
Just those
3
couple things.
minutes.
3 minutes. So, you know what? The first thing I'm going to recommend anybody that's curious and wants to learn more, go to selfacceptancequiz.com and take the quiz. It's really fast, 3 to 5 minutes to complete it. And then within a minute or so, you're going to get a report that's emailed to you. And it's going to give you a sense of, based on how you answer those questions, where are you today when it comes to both self acceptance and self improvement, right? That paradox theory that we touched on. Because a lot of people that I work with are very high on self improvement. They're high achievers, high performers. They always want to grow and improve, but they do find themselves in a self judgment loop, which causes them more stress and actually reduces their effectiveness. So I would recommend that. You'll get some coaching emails as well as a follow up based on your results. And then LinkedIn is the other place that I recommend. I'm on LinkedIn quite a bit. I love posting there about this kind of content. And so, if you want to connect with me, if you have any questions for me, just tell me that you heard me here on Dean's show, and I would love to answer anything that comes up.
Books in the works or books you've written?
Yeah, we wrote a book that came out in 2021 called The Missing Links, Launching a High Performing Company Culture. So we talk about, what we learned about NASA's culture leading up to Columbia, but mostly the book is about what can you as a leader do to create the kind of culture that actually helps you execute strategy and keep all that psychological safety intact.
And now, Laura, what are you focused on? Are you you're a speaker? I got that.
Mm-hmm.
But you also run workshops and facilitations and et cetera. I mean, you work deep within these companies that you're talking about.
Yeah, I actually do have a split focus now too, because I love to speak and I work with both organizations and individuals. So like the Stress Detox for High Achievers workshop that I mentioned, my next cohort's coming out in October, so I'm not sure if this is going to be out by then or not. But
It will be, by
it's
the
a
way. It'll be
5 week
out.
virtual
Yeah.
workshop. Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a 5 week virtual workshop. It's just 2 hours a week, and then there's some homework in between. But it's really about creating that sense of community and learning more about yourself, so that you can feel significantly less stressed out without having to change your life as a high achiever. I do like a lot of webinars as well. I have one called Rockstars Don't Stress. But most of my time, believe it or not, is still spent doing the organizational work. So leaders will bring me in. We do a lot of work with the executive team, and then we cascade down from there.
That's great. Do you know the work of Chip Conley?
I've heard that name, but
Yeah,
remind
check
me.
him out too, because there's some crossovers about what you're about. And he's got some
Nice.
great workshops that take place in 2 different parts of the country. We went to one of them last end of January, and it was just it was so great being on the other side of the fence, other side of the footlights,
Yeah.
if you will, being the participant versus the
Oh, yeah.
facilitators.
Mhm.
It was really like a vacation in self-awareness for one full week, and it was great.
That sounds amazing.
Another
Thank you for the
plug for you,
recommendation.
Chip. Well, Laura, it's been great to know you. I do hope that we connect again. And I
Yes,
don't know whether I've
I do
ever
too.
taken this self-assessment quiz or not, but I'm going to take it today.
I think that you did. But yeah, take it
Okay.
again. You
You
can take it
gotta
multiple times.
tell me about myself later.
Yes.
What am I hiding?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, that sounds good. Well, thanks again for your time. This has been great. Keep up the great work. Fantastic.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newlund. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadervation.